Director of Programs and Community Engagement here at Mechanics Institute, and thank you for joining us for this incredible talk with Kevin Adler, the author of When We Walk By, in conversation with Emily Cohen. We're very excited to welcome you all to Mechanics Institute. Who has been here to Mechanics Institute before? Who is here for the very first time? Awesome. Welcome. I hope it is the first of many visits to our incredible institution. For those who are less familiar with Mechanics Institute, we were founded in 1854. We are a cultural center, historical landmark, gorgeous multi-story accessible general interest library, events center, and world-renowned chess room. If you haven't checked out our incredible library, chess room, and building, we do tours every Wednesday at noon, and we have evening tours throughout every month. So please check our website, milibrary.org, to find out more about the incredible programs we offer here at Mechanics Institute. For those who are members, thank you very much for joining us as a member here at Mechanics Institute. For those who aren't, there are a lot of wonderful benefits of being a member here. You have full access to our library and services, the chess room, and these events that we do. We offer anywhere from 5 to 15 events per week here at Mechanics Institute. Writers groups, book groups, classes, all sorts of amazing sessions. We do have Kevin's book for sale in the back. Thank you for those who have purchased one already. If you haven't yet, you are welcome to purchase one as the event comes to a close. After the Q&A portion, Kevin will be doing book signing as well. And with that, I'm going to introduce Nico Chen, our program manager, who will introduce our amazing speakers for this evening.
I just wanted to thank all of you for gathering with us today for this thought-provoking and timely book talk. So let's give a warm welcome to Kevin Adler and we are very honored to have with us Kevin Adler, author of When We Walk By, a book that brings to the forefront the people we often simply refer to in our everyday speech as the homeless. We gather here in a moment of profound reflection, facing what Kevin aptly described in his book as the crisis of humanity within the United States. This crisis is not one of fleeting headlines or momentary shock. It is a deeply entrenched issue that touches the core of our shared human experience. In reading Kevin's book, a question emerges that challenges each and every one of us. How are we all implicated in the ongoing crisis of humanity in the United States, particularly in our interactions with our neighbors experiencing homelessness? This crisis is multifaceted, encompassing economic disparities, social stigmatization, and growing detachment in our personal and communal lives. It is about people who have become estranged from our societal fabric. Their plight is not just a matter of policy or economics. Their relational poverty is a stark reflection of our collective moral compass. When We Walk By is more than just a book. It's a mirror held up to our society, urging us to confront uncomfortable truths. It asks us to examine our perceptions, our languaging, and our actions towards those who have been sidelined by circumstances often beyond their control. As we listen to Kevin's shared insights from this book, let us open our hearts and minds. Let's challenge ourselves to think deeply about our role in this societal dilemma. This is not just a conversation about homelessness. It is a discussion about humanity, empathy, and the kind of society we aspire to be. Today, he will be in conversation with Emily Cohen, who serves as the Deputy Director for Communications and Legislative Affairs in the San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. Prior to rejoining this department in March 2020, Emily served as Mayor London Breed's policy advisor on homelessness, where she focused on local, state, and federal policy to expand and improve the local homeless response system. Before joining the mayor's office, she was the manager for policy and special projects at HSH from 2016 to 2019. In this capacity, she managed government affairs at the local, state, and national levels for the department. Emily also supported the communications and community relations work of the department, as well as serving as the Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Housing, Opportunities, Partnerships, and Engagement, which is known under the acronym HOPE, under Mayor Ed Lee. I invite you to lean into this conversation through your careful listening. Through our listening, you also engage, reflect, and participate in this crucial dialogue. This conversation is an opportunity to redefine our perspective and actions toward our fellow citizens who are experiencing homelessness. Together, let's envision and work towards a future where the crisis of humanity is met with compassion, understanding, and effective action, and after their conversation, we will open up to a Q&A. And once again, I want to give a warm welcome to the wonderful Kevin F. Adler and Wendy Cohen.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's a real honor to be here tonight and to get to ask Kevin some great questions about his book, which I hope you all have an opportunity to pick up. I found it compelling, and I found it well written, and I found the intersection of the humanitarian and policy conversations to be critically important as we decide as a community how we are going to prevent and end homelessness here in San Francisco and nationally. And so I think it's a really timely conversation and a really important dialogue for all of us to be in together. So Kevin, thank you. Can I just start by asking you some questions?
Hi everyone. This is how my voice sounds. I wore a nice shirt for y'all tonight. Christmas gift.
So When We Walk By blends a really unique approach to homelessness in the discussion around the person-to-person relational poverty, as well as the broader societal challenge and public policy challenge of homelessness. And that's the part of the book I found the most compelling, and I just kept going back to a couple of different sections of it. And so I wanted you to elaborate more on why you think it's so important to bridge these two components as we think about solutions to homelessness.
Great question. Good to be here, Emily. So I'll just start maybe with my personal background getting into this work, because I think that sets kind of some of my philosophies. So 10 years ago, I could not have imagined sitting in front of an audience like all of you talking about homelessness, let alone writing a book about it, let alone leading a nonprofit in this space. My starting point was through a family member, my uncle, Uncle Mark. He was on the streets of Santa Cruz for about 30 years. He suffered from severe mental health issues, and he ended up dying on the streets at the age of 50. Which I only found out in writing this book is about the average life expectancy for a person experiencing homelessness, about 30 years less than what you'd anticipate if they were housed. But growing up, I never thought of Uncle Mark as a homeless man because he was just a beloved member of my family. Remembered every birthday, guest of honor at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and he even sent me a birthday card every year that he was on the streets. And so it wasn't until after he passed away that I started thinking, gosh, every time I'm in downtown San Francisco, going to work, going out with friends, I see people who are experiencing homelessness, and I don't think of them as someone's son or daughter, or someone's brother or sister, or some kid's beloved uncle or aunt. I saw them as problems to be solved, not people to be loved. And so for me, my starting point getting into this work was to go through this personal metamorphosis of going from seeing my unhoused neighbors as problems to seeing them as people, not them, like us, right? And the quick overview to get to where the book became, so I spent a year basically saying, the only thing I know about homelessness is I don't know a single thing, kind of a Socratic beginning, right? And my way of gathering information and learning more was I invited, over the course of the year, 24 individuals who were experiencing homelessness to wear GoPro cameras around their chests and narrate their experience of what life is like on the streets. And the premise was simple. I just walked by you, you're still here, what's it like to be you? What do you wish passersby knew that maybe we don't? And in one of the clips, I heard something that changed my life. And it was a very simple quote, and I'll never forget it. They said, I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends. I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends. And over the last decade, leading a nonprofit, Miracle Messages, starting out by doing family and friend reunifications, and having now reunited about 800 individuals experiencing homelessness with loved ones. Having now done a phone buddy program for folks who don't have anyone to reunite to, that has matched hundreds of people around the world as volunteers for one-to-one phone calls and text messages. And also having created one of the first basic income pilots for individuals experiencing homelessness in the country, where we're now working with Google.org, giving out $2.1 million in direct cash transfers, $750 a month for a year. I've come to think of homelessness as much as a crisis in relationships, not just between our unhoused neighbors and loved ones, but in our lack of relationship with our neighbors. So for me, the starting point isn't necessarily the typical, fighting for policies has to result. We can't just kumbaya, love each other, and that's enough. But I do think as MLK, we just celebrated MLK Day, a quote of his, to paraphrase, was the crisis in the civil rights movement isn't just public laws, it's in a public consensus. And I think what we've done is we've created this other class of people that we call the homeless, and we loop everything and everyone into that class without really getting to know who they are. And quite frankly, how close so many people in this country right now are from experiencing homelessness. 1 out of every 2 Americans are a paycheck away from not being able to pay rent, and 47% of people say they don't know where they'd get $400 for an unexpected emergency. And so what we're finding and found through the book process is we ask this question all the time that's really important: why are there so many people experiencing homelessness? But given those numbers, you almost have to ask a second question, which is why aren't more people experiencing homelessness? What's keeping half the country from falling over the edge into homelessness? And what we're finding is family, friends, community, church, synagogue, mosque, relationships, social capital. And that's starting to be bared out and understood, I think, more at regional policy levels. The Denver metro area, they just released their report from the PID count and some of the surveys, and it was the #1 cited issue was relational breakdown. It's not to say that a whole host of things are going well to get to the point where your housing status and security hinges on a relationship. That's not ideal, and there's a lot upstream to talk about. But fundamentally, arguments, falling outs, divorce, death in the family, suicide, doubled up, tripled up. There's a pressure right now on relationship social capital that I think isn't being addressed, and is also is not only a cause of homelessness, but a potential pathway out of homelessness.
Absolutely, we see reunification with loved ones as as a system, one of our primary ways of moving people out of the crisis of homelessness in our community. And I think that's the exact kind of marriage we're looking for with the human-centric relational work and the financial assistance to enable those relationships and some of that transition to happen. So it was really interesting to read about that so much in the book.
Can I do a quick survey of the audience
Yes.
based on this? Okay, so show of hands, from 2015 to 2019, San Francisco, the number of people who successfully exited from the shelter system into housing, okay? So I'm gonna there's 3 primary causes. One is reunifications, one is supportive housing, and one is transitional housing. Okay, so who here thinks the relational piece was at least 10%? Okay, how many think 20% of people going from shelters into stable housing? 20%. How many think 30%? 50%? We're like boiling the water slowly here. So the answer is 60%. 60% of successful shelter exits from 2015 to 2019. And that's not miracle messages, that was maybe more homeward bound, some of the problem solving. And 30% was supportive housing, and 10% was transitional housing. So I think there's a need to kind of open up the conversation on these avenues that may not be immediately apparent, but when we have a crisis like we have, I think we need a yes and approach to ending homelessness. What else can we do? So.
Absolutely, I completely agree, and I think one of the things in the book that you talked about was network impoverishment and the real challenge of relying on your social networks to help address your homelessness if nobody in your social network has $100 to spare. If your entire network is facing some of the same institutional challenges, poverty-related challenges that you are, it's hard to rely on one another. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, what you saw in your book, how that breaks down in terms of what we see across different races and different communities. Because I thought that your reference of the Spark Initiative is really interesting.
Yeah, that was a lesson for me, Emily, in just doing the research that if you look at specific to African Americans entering into homelessness, the rates of substance abuse, severe mental health issues are much lower, and the earnings, the income, the disposable resources tend to be higher than white individuals going into homelessness. And again, the explanation is because of long-standing resource accumulation, advantages within the family, resources that are available. There's just much less wiggle room for any kind of issue before falling over the edge into homelessness. If we look at one system in the book that's highlighted, the foster care system, which is often not talked about in some of these conversations as a causal element of homelessness. So the #1 predictor of chronic adult homelessness is youth homelessness. Did you experience homelessness as a young person? Foster care youth, a third of young people who age out of foster care by the time they're 26 years old will experience homelessness. And for Black young people, that goes up to 60%. And so I think when you hear stats like that, I realize that sometimes when we see in the media the kind of response, maybe on like a Twitter conversation, it's more emotional. Like, it's not just like, give me stats, that's what I need. It's like this emotional, visceral thing. But I do think it's important to be informed on some of this information, because you can't hear numbers like that and think this is a result of individual failures of human beings. We all make mistakes. We've all, but for the grace of God, go I. And we look even state by state, California has fairly comparable mental health issues, per population, and substance abuse issues as, say, West Virginia. But West Virginia has a much lower rate of homelessness. Well, why is that? Well, the cost of living is so much lower in West Virginia. So
That's a good segue into my next question about personal attributes that I think many people associate with somebody experiencing homelessness, whether it's a personal failure, substance use disorder, behavioral health challenges, some of the things that are very stereotypical in the mind of someone who might walk down Market Street and have an experience and think about. But that perpetuates a very negative and very narrow perception of the community. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how we, as a collective group of people who care about this issue, can help change that narrative for the general public, for our family we're sitting across the table with at Thanksgiving, and instead of throwing mashed potatoes at them, I'd like to have a more productive way of trying to change the narrative.
yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, and first just really want to acknowledge all of you for being here tonight. It's, what day is it? Thursday? It's a Thursday night. We just got into the new year. Happy New Year, everyone. You can be lots of different places. And just the fact that you show up, I think it's not an anomaly, because I think there's a lot of pent-up desire in our community to help and make a difference on this issue. And it's just like, what can we do? Where do we go? And for me, my starting point really was around feelings of frustration, feeling of helplessness. Like, I think that's my least favorite emotions. Like, I don't want to feel like I can't do anything about something. But my work and thinking on this has been really informed by just countless conversations with individuals through the years. There's a chapter on paternalism, maybe I'll just highlight. Did anyone have a chance to meet, or is anyone familiar with Ronnie the Runner? Ronnie Goodman? Yeah, I see a few head nods. A couple, yeah. Incredible human being. And he had spent some time in San Quentin. He was released, and he was essentially released into the streets. And that's a whole another conversation of the revolving door between incarceration and homelessness in our country. And he became a dear friend of mine. And he was very notorious for being, for being a wonderful marathon runner and raising a ton of money all on the streets for charity, while also an accomplished artist. And 6 weeks before he passed away on the streets, tragically, he was set to have, bless you again, to have his artwork presented at PS1 MoMA Gallery in New York at this incredible exhibit. And he unfortunately passed away on the streets. And one day we were having a conversation, and I asked him about his housing prospects. And I said, hey, Ronnie, what are your thoughts about getting housed? Are there anything I can help you with? And he kind of looked at me and he said, well, Kevin, I have housing available to me if I wanted it. And I was like, oh, okay. I put on my, well, Ronnie, why don't you take the housing? Like, what's going on? And he looked at me very patiently and just said, well, Kevin, the housing is, it's a building and it's in a facility where I know drugs are present 24/7. And my concern is if I have an addiction history, if I get into that housing, there's a good chance I may relapse and pass away. And I would rather be on the streets than in an environment where that potentially is an outcome for me. And I share that story in part because I had my own extreme judgment and presumption of what Ronnie was going through and what he needed. And once he said he had housing available to me, I put all the, what are you thinking? Why are you doing this? It was paternalistic. And when I got close enough to actually hear his story, it made sense. It was like, wow, it's reasonable. So I think, part of the book, one of the big influences for me in writing this book is coming from the foster care space. And I remember a leading advocate in the foster care space said, if there's one variable that's needed, that's the determining factor of whether someone who's a young person goes through the system and does well versus they fall through the cracks. If there's one thing that can make the difference, do they have someone who goes to bed at night and wakes up in the morning thinking of their well-being, who isn't paid to do so? And I just don't think there's ever a point as human beings that we age out of the need to feel that sense of belonging and love. And so my invitation in this book, I promise you, as heavy and the opening we talked about the ways humanity's falling short, and you can think like, uh-oh, like, it is not meant to make anyone feel guilty. There is enough shaming in this space, there's enough guilt in this space, and there should be some very hard conversations on choices that we're making as a community, whether we're building the kind of affordable housing that we need to build, whether we're destituting people who are someone's, as our shirts say, everyone is someone's somebody, someone's mom and dad, to a lifetime on the streets and in and out of. We have to have that conversation. But I also think there's a lot that everyday people can do. And I'm interested, Emily, I don't want to turn the tables, but I'm just interested, like, you're in a hard job, right? And so can we just like applaud Emily for just being here? Just to show up and talk about this. And I think the numbers, it's like for every one person that the city houses, another 3 people fall into homelessness, right? So it's an inflow problem as much as anything. How do you in your work find hope and find ways that the energy that's pent up around this issue to channel it towards productive ways to make a difference?
well, I'm supposed to be asking
I
the
know.
questions
I
tonight.
wanna know, I wanna know.
No, I appreciate that, and, you know, I've been in the field, when I started working in homelessness, it was actually almost exactly 20 years ago, it'll be 20 years ago this summer, and I was sure I would not have a job doing this after 10 years. We were gonna solve this, I was gonna put myself out of work, have a whole other plan B, involves my bicycle and flowers that I'm gonna deliver to people. But I recognized a lot of the people in your book from San Francisco. They're folks that I knew from mostly as my time as a direct service provider before I started working for the government. But those are the people who I get up in the morning thinking about. Those are the stories and the lives, and it is that personal connection to people who have lived this crisis and who have survived this crisis that drive me, and that kind of give me the strength to, you talk a lot about NIMBYs in your book. You know, I lead our community engagement work for the department. I work with folks in the public who have very visceral, very strong anger towards people experiencing homelessness. And because I don't have as much personal trauma associated with homelessness, I've never experienced homelessness, I can use that privilege to go out and fight for what we need in the community. And so that's what drives me to do what we do, but it is certainly that human connection with folks mostly who have come through homelessness, but also I've lost some clients and some friends in this crisis, and they're very motivating. Well, maybe this is a good opportunity to open it up to the audience. Not sure if we have a process for this or if it's a free-for-all.
If you are interested in asking a question, just let me know and make eye contact with me, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
Thank you both for being here and talking about this. I have a couple questions just about like a couple homeless. Is this off? On? All right. A couple homeless tropes that I hear. Talking with other people. My wife and I moved to San Francisco from the suburbs about 6 months ago, and so are seeing some of this for the first time up close. And we talk to other people. They ask us about it. Our friends back in the suburbs, you know, well, gosh, isn't, you know, you can imagine the questions they ask about homelessness in San Francisco. So one feeling I get, one sentiment I hear is homeless people are dangerous. Now, is there data about this in your book or elsewhere? Either of you maybe can answer this in terms of you know, that trope and what are the chances? Because if I want to go and I want to help someone out or buy them a meal or just encourage them or whatever, how dangerous is it to engage with this person given some of the reasons for homelessness? And the second one, you can answer one or either of these. The second kind of trope is that if we help homeless people in San Francisco, just more homeless people are going to come to San Francisco. So it's sort of this Sisyphean task, and because of the climate here and whatever, and the liberal government and good people like yourselves who are working hard to help the homeless, it's just going to attract more homeless from all over the country. Is there any evidence that is true or not true? Is our homeless population overwhelmingly homegrown, or are people coming from other parts of the country who are homeless or are likely to be homeless because we provide it?
Well, first, welcome. We're glad you guys are here. Welcome to San Francisco. And the safety question is an interesting one because there's such a visceral image, I think, in so many people's minds. But it's incredibly important, and I was glad Kevin referenced this in the book because I say it all the time in community meetings, that homeless people are far more likely to be the victims of crime than the perpetrators of crime. And if and when people experiencing homelessness are engaged in violence or criminal activity, it's most often against one another over some sort of turf issue or some sort of spat within an encampment we've seen. But you know, the vast majority of people with mental illness are safely housed. The vast majority of people with substance use disorder, many of whom are in my family, are safely housed. And you know, there is not a are not necessarily more violent or unsafe in the community. They need to have services and treatment. And so definitely the data indicates that people experiencing homelessness are not more dangerous, but I know that it feels very chaotic on the street. And just on my walk over here, I had people yell at me. I had some guy talking to himself very angrily and very, very loudly, and it unnerved me. He was walking very, very close. And I can see how that can make people feel uncomfortable, but there's a difference between uncomfortable and unsafe. And that's for each individual to determine for themselves.
Yeah, I'm going to focus mostly on homelessness because I think the broader conversation is, the situation on the streets right now in this city is not acceptable, right? The level of drug dealing, drug use, lack of any kind of intervention solutions. My views on this have shifted dramatically as a result of the families of people experiencing homelessness, who are often the biggest advocates for something to be done because this is no quality of life for someone to be living and dying on the streets. So with that kind of as an aside, Emily's right with that data. I have not experienced homelessness personally, so I try to lift up the voices of folks who have in the book as much as I can. One individual in particular, comes to mind. He was the first person in my 10 years of doing this work that really reminded me of my uncle, Mark, and he suffered from schizophrenia, had some severe untreated mental health issues, and in some ways kind of hit the stereotype of what we think of as someone who's experiencing homelessness. It's worth mentioning that a lot of homelessness is invisible. We're not seen. There's a lot of women with children, mothers. That's an invisible side of homelessness. Young people, youth homeless, seniors is one of the largest and fastest growing groups of people experiencing homelessness. But I asked him just point blank, what do you wish people like me knew that maybe we don't about your experience? And very softly he looked at me and he replied, I just wish people knew that I was so much more of a threat to myself than I would ever be to them. It reminds me of a sign that I saw that was the most heartbreaking sign I ever saw on the streets. And it was a guy, not even holding it up, it just kind of was slouched against him. And it said very simply, at least give me the finger. Can you imagine? Imagine getting to a place where a middle finger in your face is preferable than what you're currently experiencing, which is being totally ignored and dismissed and otherized. So I refuse personally to allow the horrendous situation that disproportionately hurts our unhoused neighbors more than anyone else in the streets. I don't want that to cause me to lose my own humanity in the process. So what I do is I bring socks. I got a backpack full of socks. I can give you a pair of socks if you like. They are a great conversation starter. And giving out, we got tens of thousands of pairs. We also have hotline cards. You got one there, I saw it. Good job, sir. You came prepared. We also have these hotline cards at Miracle Messages, and the phone number is super easy. It's 1-800-MISS-YOU. 1-800-MISSYOU. So if someone's interested in reconnecting to a loved one, it's not for everybody, right? Or getting matched with a friend as a volunteer for phone calls and text messages, we give them that card, they can call our hotline. So I think wherever you're at, as a starting point, doing something, and if it's not talking to someone on the streets, that's fine. You can do it with a group, go out, visit a shelter, joining a phone buddy program, getting matched, 20-minute, 30-minute calls, texts every week. Just doing something is so critical, even if it's making eye contact, smiling, acknowledging someone's humanity. The last little stat is this. I'm trying to get a feel for the audience. Are y'all fellow nerds and dorks like me, or am I the only one? I see one fellow nerd, two, they're all in the back. They're furiously taking notes as the front row is like extra. So two little factoid stats experiments that have really shaped my thinking on this. So neuroscientists at Princeton and Duke did some research, and they were doing it on the medial prefrontal cortex. So this is the part of the brain that activates when we see a person compared to, say, like an inanimate object. And this part of the brain was found not to respond when we see someone that we perceive as an extreme outgroup in our society, including people experiencing homelessness. The parts of our brain that activate when we see each other in this room do not activate when we see someone experiencing homelessness. The implications of that. A few years ago, the New York City Rescue Mission did an experiment where they had individuals dress up to look homeless as unsuspecting members of their very own families walked by. Does anyone want to guess what happened? Not a single person recognized their own mom or dad, brother or sister, son or daughter, husband or wife as they walked right by them on the streets. And I think I am then left asking myself a question, and I put it forward to all of you. Would you recognize your loved ones if you walk by them on the streets? For me, the answer is probably not. So what I try to do is everything I can to get to a place where maybe it's not my loved one, but that's someone's somebody. And how do I see them accordingly that way?
And to very quickly answer your other question, about 70% of people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco were most recently stably housed in San Francisco. And that is consistent across most major cities. All big cities have a flow in and out. We know that. People come looking for opportunity, looking for a variety of things. But the majority of homelessness is homegrown, as you say.
Yeah, and I think the UCSF was the most recent source of that. I think they found statewide 75% on the average, county by county, or from the county, were once housed in that county, and 90% statewide of people who are homeless in California were once housed in California. So at some point, our homeless neighbors are and were and will hopefully eventually be our housed neighbors. So it is very much a homegrown issue.
I came to San Francisco in 1993 to raise money for Catholic charities. And most of the programs are for homeless families and men with HIV and other issues. It just seems like the issue is getting worse. And so you say that if anybody wants housing, they can have it. Supported housing? No? Okay. So I'm just, okay. There's a study in the 1990s saying that a third of the homeless people, they really don't want to have the services nor the housing because that's their lifestyle. They like the way it is, which is different than what you were saying. They don't want to go into a place with a lot of drug issues. But what I read was you go to housing that forbids drug use, and people don't want to go there because that's not their lifestyle. So for the rest of the two-thirds of the people, if they want to go into housing, government, either supported by the government or nonprofits, would they be able to get housing and supported housing?
Well, I'll share a few things on that. So there was a surveyor in a survey a few years ago in San Francisco, done of people kind of asking for charity on the street, panhandling. And in that survey, 97% of people said that if they were offered housing, they would take it. So 97%. Now, within that, when people were asked how you spent the money that you received from panhandling, about, I think you'll have to check the book for the exact number, but it's like 85% used it on food, some kind of food security. I believe it was about a third that had some kind of substance use issue and said they used some of it on some kind of substance. what I put forward is when we think about substance abuse, which is a major issue, we see it on the streets, and there is a confluence with unsheltered, chronic individual homelessness and untreated substance abuse. The biggest issue between housed and unhoused substance issues is really one of access to treatment, because we have an opioid crisis in this country, right, nationwide. It's not just among our unhoused neighbors. But oftentimes we talk about substance use as if it's a cause of homelessness. It's much more of an effect of homelessness, where people who are in a traumatized state, housing is the best form of medicine, right? Can you imagine, who here felt grumpy showing up today? I'm the only one? Y'all felt good? You guys are a good, optimistic bunch. You felt grumpy? Oh, you were just saying, what did you say? And you're like, no, I feel good, fresh as a daisy. I felt grumpy coming in today, okay? Maybe I slept 1 or 2 hours less last night, right? I got tossed and turned, I didn't, I showered, but I didn't have enough time to, shake, whatever it is. And I'm still in I was in a foul mood. I feel great seeing all of you, just so you know. I'm very happy. But I was in a foul mood earlier today, and I had all the things I need for my mental health, right? I felt like I'm stabilized. I can't imagine one night, let alone 10 minutes, an hour, being on the streets, the way people are treated, and not just a mental health, but it's also a physical health. My partner is an emergency medicine physician at UCSF, and she has people who come in with horrendous, conditions, standing all day, shoes, socks getting wet, wearing the same pair. So at some point what happens is you see a level of self-medicating, right, that's happening to numb the pain. I don't think whether you're doing this before becoming homeless or this is something that happened once you became homeless, addiction is a disease. And I think we don't treat it as a disease, and we need to. But housing right now, there's just not enough housing available, full stop. We have a nationwide shortage of 7 million units to meet current demand. And so my belief in San Francisco, one of the issues I've seen, and Emily may disagree, but that's why we're having a conversation. Maybe you'll agree, I don't know. 10 years ago, when I started this journey, it felt like the city took a very hard line, black and white view on housing. It felt like it was permanent supportive housing or shelter system. Now, the question that I always ask with housing is, would you want to live there? Would you want to live there? Because if you can't say that you want to live there, you cannot expect, not even force, you cannot expect someone who is another human being to stay there long term. For me, I'm speaking for myself here, many congregate shelters, I would not want to live in, right? There's many shelters I've been in, some in this city, some elsewhere. I don't feel safe, can't bring your stuff, can't bring your partner, can't bring your dog, you have to be in by a certain time, out by a certain time. That wouldn't work for me. I'd rather be on the streets. Now, is that a choice? Sort of, but it's because I have a really bad set of options, right? So as I've been excited over the last few years because I've seen the city starting to actually build tiny home communities, looking at interim housing, transitional housing. Emily's going to talk more about this problem solving, but I think we need, does anyone have an improv background or a theater background in here? I can tell. A couple thespians in the room, right? I was most likely to win an Oscar, was my high school class favorite. I'm still waiting. Did I get nominated? I don't think I did. But there's a philosophy in the improv world, and it's yes and. Yes and. We spend way too much time, I believe, in the homeless services space fighting over this little piece of the pie, when it's like, yes, and we need that. We need this. We need this service. We need that type of housing. So, Emily, what do you think?
I completely agree. First, in response to your question, we absolutely don't have enough of anything. We have nearly 8,000 people experiencing homelessness in our community on any given night, probably 20,000 over the course of the year. We have 3,000 shelter beds. We have the most supportive housing, because we did have a black and white approach to this for quite a long time. We have the most supportive housing
Can you slow down and
Sure.
enunciate a little bit?
Sorry, yes.
It'd be good for us back here, thank you.
Of course. We have 3,000 shelter beds in our community to meet the need of 8,000 people each night. We have more supportive housing in this community than per capita than any other city in the country. That is great. That means we're solving homelessness for people every single day, but I have thousands of people waiting for a spot in that. And you know, I've been working with folks experiencing homelessness for about 20 years, and I can say, I can remember 2 people who've told me they don't want housing. Everyone else wants housing, they might not want the housing we have to offer, and not everyone wants the services we have to offer, because they may or may not need them. And so I do think, you know, we just face a challenge of not enough, and that's why I'm a yes and sort of bureaucrat, because we do need more supportive housing. We know it works. It's evidence-based, it works very well, and it needs to be better. We need shelter, because that's been working. You know, we diss on shelters a lot, especially congregate shelters, but they're full. They're full. We need them, because we need those beds for people. And we need to keep adding options. Tiny homes, safe parking. We're gonna open our first sober living supportive housing program this coming year. And we just need to have more diversity in our portfolio and more options for people, so there's something they can say yes to. Whether the outreach worker is talking to them face to face and making that initial offer.
Emily, I have another question.
Wait a minute, we got people here.
Here.
We'll go with you and then we'll circle back. Mike.
The reason I kind of want to get into this is because for 40 years I've been talking to tenants on the phone or in person, and these are people who are housed. But it's like a tornado or some kind of series of forces that are making it so precarious. People call us, I'm trying to figure out who they are, what got them to actually talk to us, and then going the other direction, how to actually get that and figure out how we can help them. And we didn't talk about the breakdown of the nuclear family, but certainly a lot of it has to do with a simple thing as your landlord and how you deal with the landlord when your parents were your landlords, and you don't know how to deal with the real landlords. You don't have any experience doing that. So all these things are so complicated. And I hear you talking about people who actually end up, you know, falling overboard. I only can say that the issue of all the people trying to help with this really are trying to intervene in this nuclear family failure. And I think we should never forget that if you don't have that in your background, it's very hard to do what everybody else is trying to do, is trying to get a person who's on the streets back into a sense of security that they have from their families, if they ever have it at all.
Thanks for your comment, and maybe the area that I'd flag that I think is most aligned, kind of where I think you and I would probably see eye to eye quite a bit, is among the disproportionate number of LGBTQ young people who are experiencing homelessness. So I believe 9% of the population in the United States, young people identify as LGBTQ+. 40% of the unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness are LGBTQ+. And so when you hear a number like that, that disproportionality, a lot of times it's because the situation at home may not have been safe, or they may have been kicked out, that kind of breakdown.
Is that nationwide, sorry, or
Yeah,
just
yeah.
in San Francisco? Nationwide.
That is. Yeah, and one, actually, I want to keep going with the question. I want to make sure. How are we doing on time, too?
We will have about 8 minutes left, so we're gonna have Rory ask one question and Glenn ask one more question, and we're gonna end.
Great. And did anyone else have questions? Because we can do rapid fire. Okay. While we're here, we'll start with these two, and then we'll do rapid fire lightning round for the last few. Okay? I want to make sure you get your questions.
So you want me to say this real fast?
What's your name, sir?
My name is Rory.
Hi, Rory.
And I'm a recently retired location manager for motion pictures, based in San Francisco. And since, you need it? What?
No, just point it towards.
You have to hold it like you're Madonna or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
And since the 1970s, throughout my career, something always took us to one particular region in San Francisco that's never changed since. It's maybe a piece of the conversation, and this is really, I'm looking at you too, but it's to anybody in the room. Why does the 36 blocks of the Tenderloin never change? And I'm particularly looking at you because
That's a good question. Why doesn't?
what is it? Because it's a phenomena like no other that I know, that I can go there, I can go there, take you to an alley, and it hasn't changed since we shot there on The Pursuit of Happiness. Right?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I don't have a perfect answer to it. I do think, other communities like LA Skid Row has faced similar challenges. I think there's a long history of concentrating. There's some great tours of the Tenderloin that you should take from Tenderloin historians.
I could give them to you. I've
There
done
are-
4 movies there. Okay.
These Tenderloin historians that really get into the structural causes of it.
Yeah.
Like the reason it's called the Tenderloin. The cops would get a Tenderloin if they turned a blind eye to what was going on, right? Like that's how it got its nickname. Because cops were taking
I'll
kickbacks, and
challenge
this
that.
was like in the 30s, right?
I'd like to challenge that, yes. Your answer to that.
There are services in the Tenderloin that they can't get
Oh,
other places.
there's a brilliant community there. Please don't,
But there are
please
services
don't
there
get me
that you
wrong.
can't get
There-
other
There's a
places.
brilliant community there. Some amazing people in there. And sometimes I think that that's why that it is a place where there's a community, so there's a gravitation to it. And I would say that the Tenderloin is also a muscle surrounded by everything else that is treated very gently and untouchable. And I think that's a better metaphor for what's going on in that community, because part of it is frozen time. And I just really wanted to hear your perspective.
I think your perspective on it's just as valid and important to hear, so I appreciate that.
But I asked the question.
Okay, so there's a lot of history.
It was
right,
my
of why,
question.
of sort of containment zone sort of policies around the Tenderloin. I don't think that exists as much anymore, but now there's a very, very high concentration of poverty. There is a very vibrant open drug market. There are behaviors that are not tolerated anywhere else in the city.
And there's a police
Push.
station in the middle of it.
Yes, there is. And there's one of the, it's Little Saigon. There's the best banh mi's you're ever gonna eat, right? Like, there's amazing things in the Tenderloin.
We will need to continue to the next question for time.
Hi, I'm Glenn. I live in Western South Market. Over the years, I've gotten to know a number of what you might call neighborhood homeless by first name, and some of them have been written up. I'm anxious to read your book. These 5 people, not half of them are gone now. The family relationship is all fucked up, and so they've been in and out of their family homes. So what is the consequences? So they stay on the streets. Since it's been really cold, they've managed to figure out a shelter to be in, but now they're back out. And they've been around for years, and they barely survive a fentanyl overdose. So what, have you ever talked about So is there something that can be said about people who do not have the normal family net?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, many of our unhoused neighbors, there's a huge overlap between, I think it's called ACEs, you know, the Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACEs score, and homelessness. You know, the more traumas you've had early in life, the higher likelihood that you will experience homelessness as an adult, and the longer periods of duration that will be. So this piece on relationship social capital, if you're coming from an environment where there was trauma and abuse and like didn't get what you needed, you're already starting, you know, what's the opposite of starting on first base, right? Like starting in the dugout outside the ballpark. What we found is there's also a side to many of our unhoused neighbors where even if they do have loved ones who are looking for support, it may not be the mom and dad or the nuclear family, an aunt, an uncle, a classmate, a friend, and the number one reason why people don't reconnect is they say, I don't want to be a burden. I feel ashamed.
Yes.
I feel like I don't want to hurt the people I love most, and therefore I'm going to hold them at a distance. When I ask someone if they want to reconnect and they say yes, but they change their mind before the number one response, literally I've heard this probably 30 or 40 times verbatim, I can't, I feel dirty. So there's a lot that we have to do for folks who are either not have loved ones to reconnect to, or who are feeling so ashamed of themselves for being homeless that they choose to distance themselves. If you walk into shelters, you look at the bulletin board, sometimes it's filled with missing person flyers. Come home, please, we love you, we miss you. We get messages every day from family members all across the country looking for their missing relatives who's in Los Angeles, San Francisco. We've done about 120 of those needle in a haystack reunions, but it's hard. So what I found is showing our unhoused neighbors the same kind of love and respect that we want ourselves. It's not going to replace being family, but family can also be a chosen thing too. Our phone buddy program, we have folks who've done very well and are society's top, they run this company or they're in this venture capital firm, like this part of San Francisco, and they feel like they're getting as much from the unhoused neighbor as they're giving. Why? Well, maybe they don't have the financial resources, but in Bruce's case, his father passed away, and Nathaniel was the first person who called him to check in, and Nathaniel also had his dad pass away a few years ago, and they can talk about that and be human together. So part of what my call is find ways to just be in relationship with our unhoused neighbors, do what Brian Stevenson calls getting proximate. I actually think we have to get relational and get to know people by name. And then the other piece we haven't talked much about tonight, but it's a big part of the book, is the basic income. These are the direct cash transfers. So I was a skeptic on basic income. I was like, what is this thing? It's $700 a month. How much is that going to do? We had heard from our volunteers that were in our phone buddy program. They said, hey, you've asked me to be in a relationship with this person. We trust each other now. We're good. Like, we talk all the time. It's very hard for me to be on equal footing as a friend when my friend doesn't know what they're going to do for food tonight, or they don't know how they're going to get gas in their car and get to work on Monday, because 45% of people experiencing homelessness have jobs and have some kind of employment. And so, can we give them money? Can we do something? So we raised initially $50,000, right? All individual donation. We selected 14 individuals from our phone buddy program, $500 a month, 6 months, no strings attached. Within 6 months, 2/3 of those unhoused individuals were able to secure stable housing. They used the money better than I could have used it for them. And so I'm a big believer now, having seen people self-resolve their situation. It doesn't mean they're moving into, a really nice single-family home in this part, right? It's maybe doubled up. It's getting into an SRO. It's moving in with a loved one. It's being able senior housing, but I think we need to invest in our unhoused neighbors as neighbors by giving them both the relational support and the income support that, for me, is required for a basic level of dignity.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, and the city is actually doing this now, which is pretty innovative, learning from our friends in Stockton, but we do have a basic income or direct cash transfer program for young adults in the homelessness system. It's a partnership with many different entities, and we're studying it, and there are all these evaluations now going on, which, I was signing off on an evaluation for one of these projects the other day, and I was like, I don't think I need to pay researchers to tell me that giving people living near poverty some cash is gonna help their poverty, but if it's gonna convince more people to invest in this, we'll sign off on doing this evaluation. Like, it feels a little silly to study this because it's so basic, but at the same time, I think we have a lot of convincing of people to do that universal basic income or direct cash transfer, and empowering people and trusting them. They know what's best, and they know what challenge they have better than any social worker around. I mean, it's their life. And I'm really passionate about this, and I thought maybe we were gonna disagree on it, I'm with you.
And what you just heard from someone who, Emily's wearing many hats, but as a city official, that's an incredible statement to make. That 5 years ago, you would have heard very few people make that. So I think thinking about if that's the case and we both agree, how do we go from a very top-down system that is paternalistic and assumes we know what's best for our unhoused neighbors versus what they know what they need better than we do? You can't have one or the other. It's yes and still. Like, you have to have services, but I'm excited. I knew you would say that. Okay, lightning round, the last two, and then we're gonna answer it in 30 seconds or less with a short little reading here. Because I know this reading, it's going to answer your question, even though I don't know what your question is. I'm just gonna feel it. And if not, we'll answer it afterwards. So yes, lightning round.
Okay. Thank you so much for this great talk, and I'm looking forward to the book. So you've cited research all night, and I'm wondering if there is still research that you feel like needs to be done, or do we know all we need to know to resolve this crisis?
It's on this page. I'm
Okay, there we go.
Okay, next question.
Anybody want to add another question?
One thing which I think would kill two birds with one stone is I used to have an office just a block from here, and it seemed like there's about 200 square feet. And in answer to what you said about, well, I want to live here, no, I wouldn't. But if I was homeless, having like a 200 square foot office with a bathroom down the hall would be great. And I'm wondering what the city is doing to, maybe convert some of the city surplus office space into SROs.
That's coming.
My question is really simple. What is the nonprofit that you have? What is?
It's called Miracle Messages.
So, okay, and so that's where you have called by. I heard about Miracle Messages last week for the first time.
There you go.
And you mentioned it.
Here we go. Kismet.
Yeah.
So that's not on this page. You got me. It might be. I'm going to read from the page, and I'll just say my kind of closing. If you'd like to learn more, get involved now, and then I'll close with this reading, and then I'll stay after to sign books. I run the nonprofit Miracle Messages. I started that in honor of my uncle. It started with one person walking down the street, going up to people experiencing homelessness. Do you have any loved ones you'd like to reconnect with? It turned out the first guy I met hadn't seen his family in 22 years. I sat down with him on Market Street. He recorded a message, posted it online, found his family. Turned out he had been a missing person for 12 years. And we were able to get him reconnected within a few days. And that was the first reunion. We now do the phone buddy work. We have a wait list of unhoused individuals waiting for volunteers. We don't have enough volunteers. If you have 20 minutes or 30 minutes a week, we'll train you, we'll give you a phone number. You don't have to use your personal device number. We'd love to have some of you get involved as phone buddies. If if you want to be a digital detective. How many here have teenage sons or daughters? Or has had teenage sons or daughters? How many of you are like, wait, who are you going out with on Friday or Saturday night? What's their full name? Okay, Google that. Okay, you have the skills as a digital sleuth that we need. That's how we find loved ones and help people reconnect. That's a way of volunteering. And then, of course, if you'd like to support our basic income work, that makes a big deal. We are having a big event on February 3rd at the City Club San Francisco. There's a few tickets left. You can get on our website and learn more about our work on February 3rd, Saturday. Okay, is that okay? Thank you. And then I'll sign the books. So here is this page here, page 212. In times of crisis, in the early morning hours of Wednesday, April 18, 1906, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake struck along the San Andreas Fault in Northern California, with the epicenter just 2 miles off the coast of San Francisco. The massive quake caused a conflagration that destroyed some 28,000 buildings in San Francisco, leveling more than 500 blocks in the city center. More than 3,000 people died, and about 80% of the city was destroyed. In the aftermath of the 1906 earthquake and fire, some 250,000 residents of San Francisco were displaced, establishing makeshift camps in park areas and in burnt-out ruins of buildings. For a short period of time, more than half of the city's 400,000 residents experienced homelessness. In response, the city did not pass anti-camping ordinances. Law enforcement was not mobilized to raise tents and confiscate belongings. Local residents whose homes withstood the brunt of the disaster did not join together to form anti-survivor, not in my backyard protests. Instead, city officials and local residents rallied together to help. As winter approached, the city built 5,300 small wooden cottages for those still in need of housing, while the Army housed 20,000 refugees in military-style tent camps. Camps formed playgroups for kids and dining halls for individuals and families, which became the centers of social life. Tenants paid $2 a month toward a $50 price of their earthquake cottage. Many assembled in Golden Gate Park. After paying off their new home, the owners were required to move their cottages out of the camp, leaving earthquake cottages scattered throughout San Francisco to this day in an early example of scattered site housing. In June 1908, just 2 years after one of the most devastating disasters in American history, the last camp closed. 250,000 unhoused survivors had been housed. This is what we're capable of. When we look at the crisis as a crisis, it's much more akin to an earthquake, a wildfire, a tsunami, a flood, than anything else we can talk about tonight. Except we don't see it that way. We're not posting with hashtag San Francisco strong, hashtag this. We're saying, well, what did they do? Are they to blame? That misses the point. We have a breakdown of systemic proportions across our service systems, across society, housing, income inequality, incarceration, family breakdown, relational poverty, all of it added up. It's a disaster. And until we treat it akin to how we would respond, and the good news, and the positive note to end on, if there were, God forbid, another earthquake, or wildfire, or flood, I guarantee each of you and all of us who aren't here tonight would know exactly how to respond. We know how to respond as human beings to this stuff. But we gotta look at homelessness the same way. Thank you.
We have a lovely selection of books in the back for your perusal in case you want to extend your learning. We also have books for sale here.